So the main findings from my doctoral research, the central argument in the thesis is basically that there is a tension within the system which exists deliberately, which is basically that the court has to project openness to the public, that they can come in and access the courts as a litigant, because unless you've got universal access to legal representation, then you need to be able to come as a litigant in person, otherwise the courts become accessible only for the elite. Once citizens take up that invitation to come to the courts, they find that in reality it's really quite difficult and sometimes almost impossible for them to access the system in person. And that's often through no fault of their own. The people who participated in this study were often very well educated and very dedicated people. They spent a lot of energy on their cases, but they found it really hard to put their case across to the court. And there was also this tension where they're being told to go and get a lawyer, or being given more subtle signs that they weren't particularly welcome, or that it would be much better if they came represented. Self-representation's been okay when there's only a few people, but now what we've got is a significant rise in self-representation, we think, although we don't have good evidence for that. And therefore these tensions are becoming more apparent and they're bubbling up to the surface, and they're forcing policy responses. But my thesis argued there's not an easy or an obvious policy response, and that it really goes to your political decisions about how you distribute justice resources. A doctrinal study of the law alone, looking at what the law is on the books and studying what it ought to be, which is the common form of legal scholarship, is really important. But it also needs to be supplemented with looking at how law is working in the community, how law actually works in our courts, how it's applied, different forms of law. And the New Zealand Law Foundation enables that kind of study, because empirical study on law in action is very expensive. It tends to require a lot of resource in terms of data collection and analysis, and without that support it makes it very hard to conduct this sort of research. So to get that overall picture of how law operates and to give a really full picture of legal scholarship in New Zealand, then the New Zealand Law Foundation's assistance is really indispensable. Yes, so the Legal Issues Centre was endowed by a grant from the Gamma Foundation, which is Grant and Marilyn Nelson, who had an experience in civil litigation and decided to fund the centre, which the purpose of the centre is to investigate and make policy recommendations about how the civil justice system, and to an extent the criminal justice system, but the focus is on civil justice, how it could be more fair, accurate, just, and accessible to the New Zealand public. So my role as director is to develop projects and oversee research which furthers those aims. So we've begun, at the moment there's a project in Train which is about delaying the High Court in the civil jurisdiction, and then I'll be developing further projects which go to different aspects of the system, looking at all aspects of the civil justice system and how it can be made more fair, accurate, just and accessible. I think my practice experience has been really important for what has become my academic focus. So unlike how I was trained initially as an undergraduate, was very much in doctrinal law, whereas the sort of law that I'm practicing or that I'm researching now as an academic is much more empirically based, so looking at how law operates on the ground. And that's been very much shaped by the experience of being in practice in a lot of different settings, all the way from being a judge's clerk and seeing how judges operate, through to working in a developing country on human rights issues, and the experience in the tribunal in Rwanda, and as a civil litigator as well, has given me a lot of insight in areas which I'm interested in investigating about how the law operates on the ground. So yeah, I'd say it's been very important.